Hello and welcome to another Bobby Fischer video. And today, Bobby Fischer defeats a world champion, and it's a young Bobby Fischer. He was only 17 or around 17 in 1960, as he was born in 1943 in Chicago, Illinois. So in the United States, for those of you that are not from the U.S., Bobby Fischer, a great player, former world chess champion from 72 to 75. And Fischer here defeats another former world champion, Max. Now, his last name looks like it's pronounced Max U, but I heard some people pronounce it as Uwe. So here we go. Fischer is going to play this great game against another former world chess champion. Let's see how things played out here. Fischer begins with e4, and he was known for playing this e4, pawn to e4 move, saying that this was best by test, that he felt it was one of the best openings to play to try and get an advantage with the white pieces. And so the former world champion, Max, he plays the Caro-Kann defense here. So more of a solid, maybe more positional defensive opening. At this point in 1960, Fischer was already known to be a good attacking player, and he probably wanted to play something solid against Fischer. You bring this pawn forward with the idea of bringing the D pawn up, and it's backed up by the C pawn, and that allows you to counterattack here on this E4 pawn. So Fischer, being allowed to place both pawns in the center, he goes right ahead and does that, grabbing up a share of the center, attacking all these squares in the middle of the board, the most valuable real estate in the board here. Except when the king is under attack, then that becomes most important. So, the former world champion, he continues with the plan in the Caro-Kann, pushing forward, counterattacking in the center, trying to gain more space in the center, and Fischer immediately captures a pawn here. Now, generally, you don't want to move a piece or a pawn twice in the opening unless you have a good reason to. And Fischer, wanting to attack and maybe not go into a maneuvering game, he decides to capture immediately in the center. And this is the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann defense. So after recapture, we have pawns equalizing the space in the center, but Fischer is left with the half-open E-file to use for operations, whereas black has the half-open C-file. And also black is left with two central pawns, and white only has one. So let's see how the game continues. Fischer plays the Panov attack now in the Caro-Kann defense. Immediately striking in the center with a less valuable flank pawn, attacking the more valuable central pawn. And if there's an exchange here, Fischer will be left with an isolated queen pawn. So let's see how things play out. Instead of dealing with this conflict in the center immediately, a piece is developed. A good move here, developing the knight. That way, if Fischer decides to capture, the knight can recapture and blockade the isolated queen pawn. And knights are great blockading pieces that you can place in front of a pawn and try and stop them in their tracks. So Fischer develops a knight, and you see the pressure is building up on this d5 pawn. We have two attackers, two defenders. What will happen next here? Well, another knight is developed, and usually it's a great idea to develop your knights early, especially here on c6 and f6, or The same with white on f3 and c3 because the knights control a lot of central territory here, just by placing them on the third rank towards the center there. So Fischer does the same, and now we have a bishop being developed. And another general strategy in chess is to develop knights before bishops because the knights are slower, but it also gives you time to see where it will be best to place your bishops. And now, after having some time to think about it, the bishop decides to move here and pin the knight to the queen. And if there's an exchange here, well, then we could have two pieces attacking here, and one of the defenders, is pinned. So the game continues with Fischer striking first. We have a capture, recapture. The knights are in conflict in the center. So Fischer develops a queen off the back rank, breaking or getting out of the pin, and at the same time attacking the knight with his knight and queen. And if you can find moves that do more than one thing at a time, that's generally a good idea. So not only did Fischer develop a piece off the back rank, he got his queen, the knight out of a pin on the queen, and he also attacks a piece in the center there. Okay, bishop captures, pawn recaptures, so Fischer is left with a smashed pawn structure on the king side that could make an attack on the king easier if the king decides to castle there. But at the same time, the king could try and castle and go into the corner here, and the rook could end up counterattacking black on this half open g file. So the game continues with knight being protected by pawn now, and queen captures here on b7. So Fischer has gone ahead by a pawn, and now knight recaptures in the center, equalizing material, but threatening to capture here, threatening a fork of king and rook. So did Fischer make a mistake here? Let's find out. So the game continues with a check, developing a piece, checking at the same time. Black is under attack. What can black do? Capture the attacking piece. So now Fischer, instead of recapturing the knight, Fischer decides to check on c6 with the queen. And now we have king running. Instead of blocking and maybe trading queens here, now that the king has moved forward, there's also this option of capturing with check as well. So the game continues with queen capturing, knight captures. So we have an exchange. Now, something to look at here. Generally, you want to avoid having too many pawn islands. And what I mean by pawn islands, for any beginners watching this, is too many separated pawns. Now, when the pawns are all side by side, like these four pawns here, this is one big island of pawns all side by side where they can move and protect each other while they move, whereas all these pawns are isolated. They're just alone. So these lone pawn islands with no pawns that can move up beside them to protect them. So this could be a long-term weakness. We're already kind of about to go into an endgame here, and Fischer has a lot of pawn weaknesses. So the game continues here with the queen attacking, asking Fischer if he would like to trade queens, which could be a good idea, especially when your king is stuck in the center here. So Fischer refuses the immediate trade, just develops a piece, backs up the queen, and now we have his opponent doing the same thing. centralizing a rook, backing up the queen, but the computer says this is a mistake. And if queens would have been exchanged, white would just have a slight edge. But now, even though material is even, Fischer has over a pawn's equivalent advantage here after this mistake. And let's see if Fischer can find the best move to take advantage of this mistake. It looks like queen to e2 is best here. But he plays bishop to e3. And now the computer, after this move is made, is saying that that was best, better than the queen to e2 move. And I see why, because, why move a piece again that you've already moved instead of this better move of developing the bishop off the back rank, helping to cover the center a little bit. And now the game continues with an exchange of queens. And the former world champion brings his rook up to the second rank here, or Fischer's seventh rank, because a lot of times it can be a good idea to place a rook on the seventh rank, so that prevents any checks to the king. It also protects this pawn, which was under attack by the bishop. The computer says this is an inaccuracy. It would have been better to just move the pawn forward and attack Fischer's rook, and he would have to deal with that. And at the same time, that would get this pawn off of the dark squares. If there's a bishop, on one color squares, a lot of times it's a good idea to place your pawns on the opposite colored squares so that that bishop can no longer target your pawns. All right, the king steps forward. The computer says that is a great move for Fischer because as pieces dwindle down into the endgame, the king can become a very powerful attacking or defensive piece. You have to get that king into the action as you go into an endgame, especially once the queens are off the board. Just make sure your king is safe. And this move, it keeps the king centralized. It also makes room for this rook to move, maybe here and fight this rook here before black has a chance in the future to double rooks up on the open d file. So pawn pushes forward, maybe getting ready to make room for the king to slide over, the bishop to come out, and the rooks to double. Computer says this is an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to go to king to e8. But then, that could lead to a check with rook to b8. All right. Rooks attacking one another. Fischer wants to trade off material and then perhaps use his passed pawn in the endgame to achieve a winning advantage. So rooks are exchanged. This is the best move, as now Fischer will have to recapture with the king, and it pulls the king back down to the back rank, further away from the center of the board and the action that will happen later in the endgame. So king centralizes here and just lets this pawn go, as there's no way to protect this pawn. It would be really hard to protect that pawn. So the king just centralizes, and here the king grabs the opposition, which is an important endgame concept, where if the kings are lined up head on, for beginners that aren't familiar with the opposition, you want to move your king and place an odd number of squares in between the kings. So here there are 5 squares, an odd number, and that leaves an odd number of squares in between the kings, and it's your opponent's king's turn to move. And you can use that opposition to force your opponent's king away from you or to the side, and then you can gain ground. So let's see what happens here. The rook moves to the back rank, pinning the bishop to the rook here. So this effectively renders that rook impotent, I guess. The rook is just stuck in the corner now, and the bishop. So both of these pieces are really restricted here. So what will his opponent do? Fischer's opponent, brings that king up into the center, and he's heading over here towards these pawns in the end game, especially trying to get in front of this passed pawn to blockade it. So the game continues with a pawn being captured. And now Black tries to push his pawn majority forward here, hoping to use that as an endgame advantage. And Fischer pushes his second passed pawn now forward, trying to promote it. This also restricts the king from being able to move up here in the future. Although at the moment the rook is cutting that king off, and this pawn can just move up the board, and the king won't be able to stop it because of that rook up here. So bishop develops, attacking the rook, which is cutting the king off. So what does Fischer do here? Well, he decides to check the king, keeping the rooks on the board, and king is centralized here once again, grabbing the opposition, placing 3 squares in between the kings with the opponent's king to move. So Fischer grabs the 7th rank, targets this bishop, and now we have the bishop going back to its starting square. And according to the computer, that's the best. But at this point, even though Fischer's ahead by 1 pawn, the computer gives a +2 advantage. Rook steps back, pinning the bishop to the rook. Sort of. The bishop can still move and protect the rook, but then Fischer will be able to trade off rooks if he chooses to. So that's what the former world champion does. Now Fischer checks again, king steps back, and we have a check again, possibly threatening to draw by repetition here. So king centralizes, and Fischer, of course, refuses the draw because he has this strong passed pawn here. So the pawn pushes forward. His opponent presses his pawn majority, and now bishop drops back here. Well, not back, I should say. Bishop steps forward. An inaccuracy according to the computer. Apparently king to c2 would have been better. And here the bishop is kind of keeping an eye on this diagonal and these pawns here. And also now this bishop can just capture that and then target this pawn. So in the game, that is not played. Now, why is that not played? Let's take a look. Why is this move not played? Well, here it looks like the pawn would just start running and there'd be no way to stop it. So in the game, we had instead this move being played. The rook is trying to become more active, which is usually a good idea. In rook endgames, the player with the more active rook will have an advantage. But the computer says this is a game-losing mistake here. It would have been better instead to play rook to d8, lining up on the opponent's king. Maybe threatening to push forward here. Although if that is done, then white's rook could harass their king possibly. But this passed pawn is getting more and more dangerous as it heads up the board. So this would have been best. And then the king should go here to c2 to get out of the line of fire. But in the game, after we had bishop to b8, rook to c8, the game-losing mistake, that leads to this passed pawn, which is just about unstoppable now. Rook captures, and now it can get behind the passed pawn. So we have rook check here, and this is a missed opportunity. Apparently, it would have been better to play rook to d6 here, attacking the king. But Fischer plays this check. King tries to attack the rook, Another mistake by this former world champion, Max U or Max Uwe. I have to see what the correct pronunciation is. So now we have king to c4, a mistake. It would have been better to go up to king to c6, closer to this passed pawn. So Fischer brings the rook up to the 7th rank, targets the bishop, and now we have bishop centralizing and keeping an eye on this square. So the game continues with a check. So already here, can you see how Fischer will win? He's pretty much winning here. But take a look at this and see if you can calculate it out yourself. Fischer has just targeted the king. So how does Fischer win this endgame? Think about that. Pause if you want to think longer. If not, let's see how the game ended. So king is under attack. The former world champion steps forward, gaining the opposition of 1 square in between kings with white's king to move. But Fischer trades off the rooks. King captures. And now, the best move on the board. Hopefully, you were able to calculate this out. We see that this bishop is preventing the pawn from promoting. Now, Fischer could just push this pawn, and then the bishop would be forced to capture, recapture, and then Fischer would have an extra bishop and 3 pawns against 4 pawns. But Fischer finds an even better move here. He sacrifices his bishop, pinning this bishop to the opponent's king, and now the pawn will be able to promote. So this is where Max U or Max Uwe, however you pronounce it, this is where he resigned because the best move would be to just, either way this pawn is going to promote. So you might as well get a bishop out of it. Capture. Then the pawn would promote. You could go after another pawn here. Maybe with that. But the pawn would promote to a queen. And this queen would be unstoppable. I mean, if the bishop tried to go after this pawn, the king could just step over here and defend. Or here, because maybe the opponent's king would go here. But this queen would just start checking the king and going after these pawns and just wipe them out. And it's pretty much over. All right. Well, feel free to leave any comments. I always enjoy listening to what viewers and subscribers have to say. I hope this was an instructive and entertaining video for you about Bobby Fischer, and I encourage you to find a chess hero of your own. When I first started out getting more serious into chess, Bobby Fischer is one of the people that I studied because I liked his playing style and his attacking, and he was just a good all-around player. So I encourage you, if you're a beginner, you might want to start with players from longer back in history. Maybe instead of Bobby Fischer, Paul Morphy would be a great place to start, because the chess masters from 100 years ago or more, their games were a little easier to understand. Once you get up into the mid 1900s, and especially in the 2000s and today, where they use computers, then it's a lot more complicated, some of those chess games. But I do highly encourage all chess players to choose a chess hero, go over that player's games, maybe try to emulate their style, try out their openings and see what you think. Okay, feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.